My name is Charles Cattle. I'm a member of HCCDC and on the current board of directors. My job this evening is to get this show going. We are recording this event, and we're going to make a video of the entire event available on our website in a few days' time. That website, if you haven't visited it, is www.historicchevychasedc.org. There are a lot of people signed up for this evening, and the version of Zoom software we have doesn't let me control everybody's cameras and microphones. So I'm going to have to rely on each of you to make sure that you keep your microphone muted and your video camera off so that we can give our full attention to the speakers. In addition to the large number of people, we're putting a whole lot of content into a very short time. So we're doing that in order to have some time for your questions. Because we have so many participants, we're going to collect those questions in the chat box. You can see the icon for the chat box in the middle of the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll collect those and answer as many as we can during the time we have this evening. And in addition, if there are questions left over, James and Tanya and Tim have agreed to record a separate session with a more extensive set of answers that we will post on the website alongside the recording of tonight's event. Before we start, though, let me take a moment to thank everyone who made a voluntary donation to support HCCDC. You know, we're a little bit like public radio. We're free, but we depend on the kindness of supporters. We're unlike public radio in that we're 100% dependent on that support. So we thank you very much indeed, as well as those of you who have gone to our website and become members. Your generosity makes tonight and other events possible. That said, we very much appreciate everyone who's joining us this evening, and we hope you're looking forward to this discussion as much as I am. The issue of racial justice is on all of our minds these days. Tonight's event addresses an injustice that's almost 100 years old, the erasure of a longstanding Black American neighborhood on Broad Branch Road. This is one of a series of events that we're calling Race Matters Locally. Tonight we have a compelling story in its own right, but it's also a crisp example of the many stories of how racism gets baked into the institutional and even the geographic structure of our society, leaving huge challenges for all of us in addressing the modern manifestation of racism. And of course, the event we're talking about tonight is not the only incident of racism that took place as this modern Chevy Chase neighborhood was created out of farmland and the small cluster of neighborhoods, white and Black, that existed along the old roads and locations, Belt Road, Grant Road, Fort Reno, Broad Branch Road, many more. Tonight, we're going to tell a part of the story. In a month, October 15th, we're going to share a story of how Marquita Lafayette and George Poynter are in fact connected. If you look at our website for an upcoming event, Lafayette and Poynter, joined in ideology and now in a park. You can register for that event as well. Beyond October, future events in this series are going to mark our commitment to helping history move along to face our current challenges. So this evening, you're going to meet an amazing individual, Captain George Poynter, sadly long past. He died many, many years ago. But to make that possible, we have three very much alive, amazing individuals to introduce you to him, to his family, and indeed to the lost part of our story here in Chevy Chase, DC. So I'm going to ask Tim Hannapel, Tanya Hardy, and James Fisher to please turn on your microphones and to start your video. My fellow audience members, while they do that, if you can please remember to put your questions in the chat box as they arise. That will be helpful when we get to that part of the program. And also, of course, again, keep yourself muted with the video off. So with that, Tim, if you guys are ready, please take it away.
Thank you, Chaz. I really just so delighted that everyone's been able to join us. And Chaz, thank you so much for your MC duties, your hosting duties. I don't see James and Tanya's video. So if James and Tanya, if you're listening, if you could turn on your video camera and we'll see if you can pop up.
Tim, we can see you.
Okay, well, maybe everyone else can see James and Tanya. I hope so. Let me just say thank you, especially to James Fisher and Tanya Hardy, who are going to help us tell the story tonight. James is the 8th generation descendant of Captain Poynter, and Tanya is James's partner and a very experienced genealogist. And we're so delighted that James and Tanya have joined the board of Historic Chevy Chase, DC this year. Kind of a nice bookend to them joining our neighborhood, at least on the board of our organization. A little bit about the format. I'm going to be presenting slides, history slides, to get people kind of acquainted with the basics. Tanya's going to help me with several of those. Then I'm going to show you some slides about the campaigns that we've embarked on to get recognition for Captain Poynter and the descendants, and to have some attempt at acknowledgement and reconciliation of what happened in this neighborhood, and also really to tell a story of American and DC history through the lens of 8 generations of this really distinguished Black American family with a very illustrious ancestor. So without further ado, I'm going to try to share my screen and start the slides. Let's see if this works. Okay. Okay, now I have to move these guys down a little bit. Present. Okay. All right, now let's go back up here. Bear with me just a second, folks. Sorry about this. Let's go all the way to the top, and then let's go to full screen. Okay, here we are. Here is the first slide, and as I mentioned, we're going to go through the history slides. Tanya will present several history slides of our campaign, and then we will and then I'm going to ask James and Tanya a couple or 3 questions to just get us going with the Q&A, and we're going to try to leave plenty of time for questions that you can put in your chat box. Let's start with where we are talking about. I'd like to start this talk with the location, and many of you are participating not from DC, and so you'll want to see exactly what we're talking about. Chevy Chase, DC, if you can see my cursor up there, it does sit on the borderline between DC and Maryland. We're talking about the DC side. Here you can faintly see Connecticut Avenue, Rock Creek Park, and we are right there in the middle. That is a slide from today. Let's go to a slide from a long, long time ago. We can see a lot. I like a good map. And what we can see from this map, the historic map, is from the 1919 based atlas. And those of you who are history mavens will know that these atlases are available. Many of them are online now. And I especially want to thank historian David Rotenstein, who did a fantastic, lengthy study of the River Road Cemetery, including the neighborhoods that participated in the utilization of that cemetery. So he did this beautiful slide, and he highlighted the Black-owned land in purple there, which you can see. And so we can see, just to orient you to the map, we see Broad Branch Road here running roughly north and south. We see 33rd Street here running north and south. And we can see some interesting things about what was going on in 1919. Okay, we see some yellow squares. Those are structures, houses. We can see that Northampton Street is not built all the way through yet. We can see that Quezada Street is not built all the way through yet. We can see a large tract of farmland here. We can see Rittenhouse Street up here at the top. We can see that the Black-owned properties totaled to 6.17 acres. Now, the total footprint today of Lafayette Elementary School and Park, remembering that it's about this area right here, tennis courts would be up here, is 12.5 acres. And that is one of the largest footprints of any elementary school in DC. And you might ask yourself, why? Well, there are not too many elementary schools that have a beautiful park associated with it. And we can ask why that's necessary, why that happened that way. We can also see the surrounding neighborhood. We can see it's called Chevy Chase Grove. We can see that there are not a lot of houses built yet. We can see Broad Branch Market right here on the corner, but we can see a lot of small building lots. Not many built on, just one here on 33rd Street. There's the beautiful bungalow on Northampton Street there, which is right next to the school, but not a lot of building yet. Now, I go to the next slide, I'd like to focus on this triangle of land here. If you can see this name here, it's very tiny, Mary Moten, okay? Now, she had 0.46 acres, not quite a half an acre, and the 4 lots that form this triangle total up to just shy of 2.5 acres. Now, those are the 5 lots that belong to the Moten and Harris family. The southernmost belong to Mary Moten, the other 4 belong to her siblings. The 5 lots total to just under 2.5 acres. This was the land that had been purchased in the 1840s by Mary Harris and her husband Joseph. Mary Harris was George Poynter's granddaughter. She was born in 1820. Mary Harris first lived with her grandmother and grandfather, George Poynter, Captain Poynter, and his wife Elizabeth, who was known as Betty Poynter, along the shores of the Potomac River until George and Betty died, we believe, and we are so lucky to have on the line with us tonight Barbara Torrey and Tiggy Green, and I'll tell you more about Barbara and Tiggy, but we believe that there was a typhoid a plague that went through in about 1832 that may have taken the lives of Captain Poynter and his wife. But Mary Harris lived with them and worked on the canal with them when she was a little girl. Mary Harris lived on the Broad Branch Road property from the 1840s until 1923. She was 103 years old. And it was really a farm, a family village. And you can see how careful she was to divide her 2.5 acres carefully into half-acre plots. I think for herself and 4 of her surviving children. But there are 5 plots. Now, let's go on to the next slide. I start with the land, but now you say, well, what about Captain Poynter? Let's move on to talk a little bit about Captain Poynter. Okay. Now, let's make the connection between Captain Poynter and the Broad Branch Road property. We know a lot about George Poynter from his 11-page petition, which is dated September 5th, 1829, to the Board of Directors of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, the C&O Canal Company, in which he is asking the C&O Canal to please protect his home because it is in the path of the canal as it's about to be built. So we see he's petitioning the company to save his land, which will sound familiar, 100 years later. But in this 11-page petition, we know so much about him because he recounts his own history of being born enslaved in 1773 on a plantation near Rockville. He talks about his purchase of his own freedom at the age of 19 and his 42-year employment with the Potomac Company, which including he was the last superintendent engineer. He was a supervisor as a free Black man. Quite an amazing master of river. Now, the picture that we have displayed here is a picture of the exhibit at the Great Falls, Virginia Visitor Center. And unfortunately, it's closed right now, but I really recommend if you want to learn, and it's a great field trip for kids and families to go over, enjoy the outdoors, and learn about the Potomac Canal. Raise your hand if you knew that there was a precursor to the C&O Canal, and it was a very odd canal. It was George Washington's dream to build a water link to the west. He owned a lot of property out in Western Maryland, and the idea of the C&O Canal, the successor, was eventually to reach Pittsburgh. But the Potomac Canal was what's known as a skirting canal. Wherever you could use the river as the waterway, you did. And when there were falls, you would use a skirting canal. And so in a minute, I'm going to show you where George Poynter's house was on the Little Falls skirting canal. But we know a lot from the letter. And I want you to pretend if you covered up this sign, pretend that sign isn't there, because that's the way the exhibit was before James and Tanya and I lobbied to get some recognition for this man. Now, you can kind of see over here, there's a picture of this, and it's like a large diorama with 4 tall wax figures. This is a mock-up of Captain Poynter. Now, it's kind of a cool exhibit because you can push a button and a light comes on above each figure. And the first guy is like a guy with a tri-corner hat, and he's the surveyor. And when it's George, and they say something, okay, I worked the canal. There's a woman who ran the tavern. There's an Irish worker. And the last one is George Poynter, but it's not identified. It's when it's his turn to speak, he says, I was born enslaved in 1773. And it's clearly from the letter, from the 1829 letter. And up until 2 years ago, it was not credited. And so if you look at the exhibit that the Park Service put up, it says, and I'm just going to read it to you because it's pretty interesting. Who was George Poynter? It says right over here. Captain George Poynter is directly quoted in this audio exhibit, unlike the other characterizations displayed here. The other people are made up, but Captain Poynter, it's right from his letter. And it just goes to show you that here's the Park Service itself. It's kind of a cover-up. They're going to use his letter, but they're not going to give him credit. So, but not anymore. That's been fixed. He was one of the first enslaved laborers rented to the Potomac Company at age 13. He purchased his freedom at age 19 and continued to work on the canals for 40 years. He was mostly self-educated and was the last superintendent of the Potomac Company before charter was transferred to the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. I love this paragraph too. Great Falls Park staff is currently working with 7th generation descendants of Captain George Poynter to reconcile this untold story. Ask a ranger to learn more about this ongoing project. You know, James, we figured it out. You have to start with Captain Poynter generation number 1, which makes James the 8th generation. Okay, now what the 1829 letter, as well as other sources, tell us is that George Poynter was a hugely accomplished person, as mentioned, purchased his own freedom at the age of 19, going on to have an extensive and successful career for this important company started by none other than George Washington. We know that Captain Poynter established himself and his family, and therefore his descendants, into freedom from enslavement, a remarkable fact given the overwhelming prevalence of slavery during that time. We also know that Captain Poynter was really a master of the Potomac River, so much so that when it came time to break ground on the C&O Canal in 1828, and that was really the most important public works project of the day, you think about the Erie Canal, it was so important that, of course, the president went for the groundbreaking, President John Quincy Adams. And he writes about it, President Adams does, in his diary. He kept a diary every day, and he talks about going on the boat up the canal, up the old Potomac Canal to the groundbreaking for the new canal. And he talks about the golden spade that he turned the first shovelful of dirt, but he hit a root and it didn't work out so well. He had to dig somewhere else. It was kind of embarrassing. But in any event, Captain Poynter played a huge role in the groundbreaking, and in fact was the pilot of the boat that carried President Adams and his entourage to the groundbreaking. And now I'm going to show you exactly where that groundbreaking was. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. Okay, I just wanted to show you, here we can see the red marks where the Poynter home was. And here we have a picture of James and Tanya, and that's Barbara Torrey. That is the powder magazine. George Poynter, age of 13, was put in charge of the black powder, the gunpowder that was used to blast the canal. Imagine putting a 13-year-old in charge of black powder. But he did a very good job of it, and we believe it was kept in this powder magazine, which you can see has survived for 240 years. But this is the location of the powder magazine and what is the remains of the Poynter home. You can see Canal Lock 6 down here, and here is the neighborhood of Brookmont, right up above here. Now I'm just going to say one last thing, and then I'm going to hand it over to Tanya for the next slide. And the thing I want to say is about this very intrepid 8-year-old girl who was part of the boating party for President Adams. And there's a very interesting story about this little girl who was age 8. And now I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to hand it over to Tanya. Want to take it away?
Okay, thanks, Tim. Can you hear me well? Very good. This picture is something that's valued very, very much by the Poynter family, because it's the only picture that they have that shows Mary Moten sitting below. This is the home place in Lafayette, what was their home place. That's now Lafayette Park. The house was located near the tennis courts are now in the old rec center. It was very close there. The picture up in the upper right corner is a picture of Mary Ann Harris, who bought the property and developed that property for her family. As Tim told you, there's a story that's been told about the granddaughter of George Poynter, who was Mary Ann Plummer. Mary Ann Moten tells a story in 1928 when a newspaper reporter comes by the house to talk about the 100-year celebration of the C&O Canal. And he hears the story of a young girl, age 8, whose father tells the others on the canal that he has a daughter who can pilot that boat from DC, which is going to be carrying John Quincy Adams down to Lock House 6, where the celebration is going to take place. That young girl was Mary Ann Harris. She was Mary Ann Plummer at the time. And of course, no one believed that. However, her father had trained her in such a way and taught her how to do that. And she actually drove that boat, piloted that boat right on down the canal, and took the president of that time to the celebration section. And she has other stories to tell about the party and the gold spade that Tim was talking about, and the entire ceremony and how exciting it was. The family lived on this property for almost 80 years. They had developed a farm, not a farm, but a village of support, because as the children got older, as they married and raised their own children, pieces of that property were partitioned off and they had their own homes. So it was a place of growing, a place of thriving, and a place that they all very much cherished, I'm sure, because this was during a time when they were free people of color, and they were able to look from their property across Broad Branch Road and see the slaves who were in the belt plantation, which was right within eyesight of them. So they knew how important it was to provide a life for themselves, and that they were really at the advantage, because during this time there were not many African American families who had their own property, their own land in this sort. Mary Ann Harris had 2 sons who immediately enlisted in the United States Colored Troops when the Civil War began. And they were there in 1863. They went to what now we call, there's an island, and the name I'd lose the name of it right now. However, there was a place right, I'm sorry?
Mason Island, now known as Roosevelt Island, yeah.
Thank you, Roosevelt Island. That was the place where the African Americans who wanted to join the Union troops could go and enlist. So those 2 young men, John and Joseph, who were sons of the Harrises, immediately went. They were actually enlisted into the 1st Infantry Company G, and they fought during the Civil War to make the things right that they had seen very much of being wrong during their time during this property, I'm sure, when they were able to see the slaves that were across from them. Okay, we can go to the next one, Tim. This is actually a copy of a newspaper article that was published in the Washington Post, and it talks about the celebration in 1928 for the 100th anniversary of the C&O Canal. And in this particular piece, it talks about the story that I just shared, where that 8-year-old young lady was piloting the boat down to, piloting the canal boat down to the area where the celebration was going to take place. And it also talks about the partying, but also Mary Harris, who is the one that, Mary Moten, who is the one who's being interviewed at this time, talks about the fact that the land is going to be taken and that the government has decided that this is going to be a space that's going to be used for schools. So she has a little bit of sorrow in the information that she's giving this reporter about what's possibly going to happen in the loss of their land. All right, Tim. In 2015, the descendants of George Poynter were able to come together for a family reunion. And this was epic to the family, because up to this point, no one had any idea of no knowledge of a man named George Poynter, the fact that they were even related to him. The taking of the property on Broad Branch was devastating to this family, because up to that point, up to the 1920s, the late 1920s, it provided a place of support. It provided a place for everybody to come together. They supported each other. They lived side by side. When the land was taken, they all scattered throughout Washington, D.C. And really they had no choice, and they really didn't know where they were going. So they found wherever they could go. They all couldn't go to one place. They just scattered everywhere. And that affected the family greatly. They lost their sense of support. They were not seeing each other as much. And so right about spring of 2015, Mr. Fisher and I decided, why not try to put together a family reunion? So he had a meeting with the eldest family members, told them all about the history of George Poynter, the property where Lafayette Park is now. Everyone was surprised that that was property that belonged to the family. And they talked about bringing everyone together. And we also talked about having this first reunion on the home place land. So it ended up being a wonderful, wonderful event. And it was really interesting to have persons who lived in the Chevy Chase community and who on Saturdays usually use that park for a time to bring their children to play and taking walks, to come by and say, hey, what's going on? You know, what are you all doing here? And as we shared with them, the reason we're here is because this was the Poynter family home place, and we're all descendants of the Poynter family. They were amazed. Many of the persons said, wait a minute, we were told this land was abandoned. It was barren. There's no families here. So it was an opportunity to share the truth about the property, and also to hear the people that came by say congratulations, wow, that's something else. You know, we're so sorry that happened. We're happy that you're able to join together here and celebrate this place and really find out where their beginnings had started. So it was a very, very special time, and everyone appreciated it. The kids had a great time, and we were able to begin to feel a family sense again, to have a coming together. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tanya. And I'm so looking forward. Well, I'll just say this. As Tanya has said, the coming together of the family at the home place in 2015. In 2016, Carl Lankowski, our president of Historic Chevy Chase DC, interviewed James and Tanya. And that interview is on the Historic Chevy Chase DC website. It was one of the first things that I read that just sparked my interest in this story, having grown up just a block from Lafayette and going to school there and to deal in Wilson. And then wanting to get involved with Historic Chevy Chase DC, because we agreed as a group that it was important to bring this story to the rest of the neighborhood. Important to know this history of displacement and a Black land loss, and to begin to try to, at least in some way, reconcile the story to the neighborhood. So we started a petition drive, and I'm just going to show you some pictures. We'll click through these, and then we'll get to some questions. Here's our petition drive last summer. We got, and as Tanya says, we started with the table and the posters, and people would come up, and just in a minute or two, they would immediately grasp how important this was. And we got 550 blue ink signatures in just about 60 days. And we went to the ANC, and here's our friend Tracy at the Broad Branch Market. She hosted the petition there. Here's people out on a beautiful Saturday. Then we brought the petition to ANC 34G, and we're so grateful to the ANC and to Randy Speck and the other commissioners. We brought this to the meeting of July 2019. There's Carl testifying and James testifying. And the picture on the welcome screen was of me and James feeling very happy after that resolution was adopted unanimously. And we knew that we were on to the city council. So here is just a slide of the resolution. All of this is available online at the website. And the next thing that's happened, of course, as many of you know, the rec center is being renovated. And a big, beautiful new rec center is being built. Here is the groundbreaking for the rec center in December 2019. There's Mayor Bowser with her daughter Miranda. And here's a group of us with Council Member Todd who introduced the legislation. The next thing that happened is we knew that it was important to tell this story to everyone who would listen to it. And so one of the highlights and one of the last things that we did before we all went into lockdown is we got to tell this story to an amazing assembly of 4th and 5th graders at Lafayette Elementary School. And there's James up in the front of that beautiful assembly. Those kids sat, cross-legged on the floor for 45 minutes, and they asked the most amazing questions. And I do want to give a shout out to Principal Carrie Brocard, to Barbara Torrey, to there's Tanya, of course, and me, and James. Linda Ryden is one of the teachers who organizes this. For those of you who know Linda, she is the peace teacher at Lafayette, and there is, well, she's under my screen. That's one of the administrators, and that's Jared Catapano, who's a 5th grade teacher. And it was an amazing event. And I'm going to tell you what happened to bring our story to as recently as yesterday. As recently as yesterday, we had an amazing event. We had a hearing yesterday in front of the DC Council. There's Mendelson, and this is the Council of the DC Committee of the Whole on the Lafayette Poynter Park and Lafayette Poynter Rec Center Designation Act. Here is Carl testifying. There's Chair Mendelson. Here's James testifying. Here's Chair Randy Speck from the ANC. And then I'll talk about Barbara and Tiggy in a minute. But here is Marley McKay, and this is Penelope Mason. They were both at the assembly last year. They are both now in 6th grade at Deal Middle School. And we are going to be posting the testimony so you can both watch it, the video of the hearing. But I just want to give a shout out to Marley and to Penelope for just being just the most incredibly heartfelt testimony. And we really knew that we were striking an important chord when young people like that could understand the story so well and understand the injustice that was done, and understand the need to preserve this history, to tell the story. Now, I just want to give a special shout out now to Barbara Torrey. There's Barbara right there, and there's Tiggy Green. Barbara and Tiggy are co-authors. They live in Brookmont, and they have been working on the story of George Poynter and his descendants for more than 10 years now. They wrote a very scholarly article in 2016 that's in the Washington History magazine, and they are working on a book. The title of the book is Between Freedom and Equality, The History of an African-American Family in the District of Columbia, and it is going to be published by the Georgetown University Press in the spring of 2021. So next spring, stay tuned for that. Now, in addition to the hearing, which it looks like our name chase is going to go through, the last thing I want to say before I open it up to questions is that we are working on signage for the rec center. And we're very close to getting a contract approved. We're going to be working with the graphic designer and the city, and we will have community engagement around what those signs look like. So that's the last. Well, we do have one more slide. We have a cool slide here. This is George Poynter's signature on the petition. James this will look familiar to James because he used this signature in a recent. We applied for a grant at the University of the District of Columbia to turn this into a curriculum. So I want to read it. He has the most beautiful handwriting. Gentlemen, I have the honor to be, with the greatest obligations to you all, your very humble and obedient servant, Captain George Poynter. And in case there was any question about the date, look at that date, September 5th, 1829. That letter is in the archives as part of the National Park Service archives because it belongs to the C&O Canal. And we hope that that letter will be going places sometime soon so that it will be more visible. I am going to now stop sharing my screen. Let's see if I can do that. Okay. Okay. So I can see James and Tanya. What we're going to do now is I'm going to ask James just a couple of questions, and then we're going to take some questions from the chat that have been curated by Mr. Cadwell. So James, my first question to you is, Tanya talked a little bit about the family reunion. When did you first learn about Captain Poynter?
I can't tell you the exact date, but it was nearly 9.5, between 9.5, 10 years ago. And I received a email from Tiggy and Barbara asking the question, did I know I had a famous ancestral grandfather? And that they had been looking for my family for a while. And from there, we made plans to meet from that time and jointly do research and exchange interpretations of what happened that weren't very clear. So we worked very close together.
Okay.
Mhm.
What was your reaction when you learned about this ancestral grandfather of yours?
I froze to 500 degrees below. After defrosting, I just stared at the email. I read the email several times, and I knew I had to seek confirmation after that point.
And Tanya, maybe you'd explain to the viewers how it actually happened technically.
Okay. So when I first met James, I love genealogy. So I'm always asking people, hey, how would you like for me to study your family history? And I began doing so. And I started, of course, from current times and then going back into the history. And as I was doing that, I received a message on one of the databases that I use, which is Ancestry, from someone saying, I believe you are researching a family that we have been researching, and could we get in touch with you? And so I got excited and I sent a message to the person that had sent that to me, and it happened to be Barbara and Tiggy. And they said, we've been researching someone named George Poynter, and we believe that that person is related to the same person that you're developing your tree for. So I got very excited about that, and I shared it with James, and then I gave them James's email address so they could contact him. And from what they were saying, I said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we need to get together and talk. And we got together for our first lunch, and it was just, it worked. It was exactly correct. We started comparing notes. I said, yes, he is your great-great-great-great-grandfather, James. So it was quite a shock. And they had a massive amount of information about George Poynter to share.
For some time. So Tanya, what you're saying is, when you were on Ancestry doing James's family tree, you were going from the current times backwards.
Mm-hmm.
You were doing that. You left like an electronic footprint that other people could see. Mm-hmm. And Barbara, and look where we are now.
Exactly.
Thank you, the internet. Now, let me ask you I have two more questions for you, and then we're going to open it up to the chat. James, last night when we were talking, I didn't know this before, but you mentioned that Barbara and Tiggy took you up to the park at Lafayette for the first time. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Those are two shocks to me. That was the second shock, learning that my family owned that property or had owned property. And so when we went there, I was just amazed. I looked around, and the first thing I can do is just imagine children running around and the homes that were there. And what really resonated with me and stayed with me even till today is that when you enter the park on the Broad Branch side, you have to walk up a hill. So it was just sitting, I was standing up on the hill, and I looked around, and I could imagine seeing enslaved people working in the farm, on the plantations and farms, actually taking hope from seeing the children playing and running freely on the village, on the property. So that was uplifting because by their presence there, they gave hope to the enslaved.
Right.
That could see them.
They could see freedom right across Broad Branch Road in the form of your ancestors and their kids playing, tilling the farm, raising the gardens, etc. Let me ask you one more question, and then we'll go on to the chat, which I keep saying. I see there's 20 questions in the chat. But James, and Tanya, all of the things that you've done since then, the signage at Great Falls, the renaming of the park, the signage here at Lafayette at the rec center. Where do you see this going, and do you have an ultimate goal?
Yes, our ultimate goal is to make sure that the message about the amazing African-American ex-slave man, George Poynter, that information and all the stories about him and all of the things that he did, because not only was he working for the Potomac Company, but he also was piloting granite down to DC for the building of the federal buildings. So that he was working on the building of the Capitol building and leaving the granite there. So he provided a lot of important things everywhere he was. It wasn't just the C&O, not the C&O, it wasn't just the Potomac Canal, it was the Great Falls locks and the amazing job that he did as a superintendent engineer, something that an African-American ex-slave man in early 1820s, that was just unheard of. So we want a place for him in the the African-American Museum in Washington, D.C. That's our ultimate goal.
So if there's anyone listening tonight who works for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, hit us up, okay? Because we would like that letter, and we would like George Poynter to be named.
Exactly.
It's also
Let me just say this. One of the interesting things about his story is that he was a unique man out of his time, and that would clearly come through. He was so unique that you'll find that white America couldn't find a place for him, and that lived for up until recent times.
right.
One example is the exhibit at the falls. They left him unnamed.
Right.
So you'll find interesting things in the book as well. Our struggle to get him recognized.
Right.
He was known about, but he was hidden from sight. So,
And
thank you.
he keeps reaching out to us today, doesn't he?
He reached out to me.
He
He
did.
reached out of his grave to me as my hand was extending out to him.
Yep. I hear you. Okay, let's open it up. Chaz, do you have some questions for us to take?
Thank you, Tim, I do. And thank you, James and Tanya, both as well. We've got sort of three kinds of questions. There are some very specific questions about property and things along the road that I want to make sure we get in. And then the other two groups of questions, one related to how this land came to be targeted for taking and what was going on at the time.
Sure.
And the other related to what I call the so what question. This is a great story, and it's obviously the destruction of a whole village or a community of people and a family. But that's a great symbolism that we can rename the rec center and the park, but is that enough? So Tim, maybe if I could start with you, and maybe can you share what you know about the crowding at the E.V. Brown School and
Well, sure. Let me take that. It was actually one of the questions that was put on the listserv just recently by the curator of the listserv.
As you do that, maybe you could put up the slide of the base map again so people can see how unique this neighborhood was in the midst of the growing
Let's see if I can
neighborhood.
share the screen again. I'll put that base map up there. Let's see. Where did the slide go? Let's see if I can get to that. I can't get to it that way. I'm not getting, shit, you guys. Well, I can't see.
You have to show us with your words, I guess.
Well, my computer. I'm gonna stop the share. I'm sorry. I don't want to tie things up. Well, let me just say, because it was a question about where was the targeting from, and if you remember the base map, remember the Chevy Chase Land Company had drawn all these lots up all around this a piece of land that had a big farm at the top, the Jones Farm, and that farmhouse is still on Quesada Street. It's the oldest house that survives. It's from 1850, and then there was the black-owned property. Now, we have to remember what happened and why it was targeted. As the white suburbs grew up Connecticut, up Wisconsin, the Chevy Chase Land Company was the heavy hitter. That was created by Senator Francis Newlands, who had very racist views, a sponsor in Congress of legislation to deny the vote to black voters, to ship black folks back to Africa. His views were known, and that's a story for a different time. But the Chevy Chase Land Company had in mind the development of this suburb as this neighborhood as a whites only community. Now, sometimes they used racial covenants, other times they didn't, but if they were gonna sell a group of lots to a builder, the builder would surely put in place a racial covenant so that it would be a whites only neighborhood. Now, what I want to say is that even though it was an unelected government of 3 white male commissioners, the citizens associations were very, very active because it was one of the few ways that the citizens of DC could make their views known. And in particular, the Northwest Citizens Association, Chevy Chase, Friendship, etc. I'm going to read something just to give a little flavor. This is from a 1948 a report called Segregation in Washington, a report of the National Committee on Segregation in the nation's capital. Quote, the old Negro settlements around the Civil War forts have been gradually whittled down. The white population, once indifferent to these hilly regions because they were too far out of town, has come to consider them highly desirable residential sections. Few colored families have been able to resist the methodical real estate purchasing agent or fight against the condemnation of their property. Originally, the citizens associations were neighborhood improvement societies interested in such things as trees and flowers, schools and parks, and improved city services. Not until the 1920s did the citizens associations, become actively concerned in the containment of Negroes and turn into a front for real estate interests. So that's from a 1948 government report. And the leaders of the Chevy Chase Land Company and the Chevy Chase Citizens Association were kind of one and the same. You'll see some names, Harold Doyle, Proctor Doherty, who became a DC commissioner, both members of the Citizens Association. Remember that the Citizens Association was explicitly whites only. Blacks were not admitted until that was not changed until the late 60s, we believe. And I think at one point there were 3,000 members of the Chevy Chase Citizens Association. So I don't, look, people are, these are functions of the time. It was a very different time. Don't forget that, when Woodrow Wilson showed Birth of a Nation in the White House and gave life to the Ku Klux Klan in 1915, by 1925, only 10 years later, very famous march down Pennsylvania Avenue of 35,000 KKK members without their hoods on. And that's one thing, but there were 150,000 spectators. So it's a very different time. Racism it's kind of almost at its apex. And Jim Crow began to be, cemented into the infrastructure of our neighborhoods, of our government, of our school system, of course. So I've gone on too long. Let's have the next question, and let's make sure it go to James and Tanya. Thank you, Chaz. Oh, I would one last thing to add about about the E.V. Brown School. Yes, there was a school from 1900 on Connecticut Avenue called the E.V. Brown School. By the 1920s, there were 1,000 students enrolled there. They were grossly overcrowded, and the Chevy Chase Citizens Association was all about building a new school at Lafayette. They identified that property. And the last thing I'll say is that by the 1940 census, the only Black citizens in the neighborhood were either domestics living in houses working for white families, or maintenance or custodial staff at the Connecticut Avenue apartment building. So the clearing was complete by then.
And we should go on to mention that the Citizens Association is very much a different organization today.
Correct.
May I ask Tim a question?
Yeah,
Tim, what did you put in your Gatorade today?
It's just water, James.
No, thank you, James. The CCCA today is a very different organization. They've had at least 3 African-American presidents in recent times, and very much a part of they, along with our organization, are parts of the racial justice committees that the area ANC 3-4G has put together to address our times.
Well, in fact, the Citizens Association endorsed the naming of the park.
Yeah. This issue of the fact that renaming the park and that the council will, we hope, support the legislation that the hearing was about yesterday is all good. It's important symbol for neighbors, for visitors, for students who are in schoolyards away, raises up some history that was indeed buried or ignored. But James, we've talked about this off and on, but what else can be done to right this wrong?
Oh, okay.
Should we, several people in the chat have asked whether there should be reparations paid to the family.
Well, the clear common sense, my clear common sense answer is to give Black people their own country within this country. Oftentimes I hear the phrase, this is a democracy experiment. America is. If that's so, then African Americans are equally in this country as an experiment. We don't have dominion. We don't have power over laws. We can't govern ourselves, and we can't directly create programs of growth and learning for our children. We know that there are differences between the races, and we have to conform to the dominant race, and which we have, and still we rose, and still we rise. So, and we're born with this extra racist baggage to carry in life, and that itself has a mental is mentally tragic. So
James, tell me about your family in particular. When the family was displaced, where did they go?
Statistics even states that once we were uprooted, many of the colored people moved to northeast and southeast, which my family did. So I'm within that statistic.
Yeah, and Tanya, you mentioned the other day that some people moved elsewhere, like to Reno City.
I'm sorry, say again?
You mentioned the other day about people moving to Reno City only to be moved along again.
Yes, and matter of fact, there were 2 of the members of or ancestors of James's family. One was a Moten, William Moten, who was in that same area and ended up having to move. And then Mary Ann Moten's granddaughter, their family was over there because there was a school there for the children to go to. And at one point, they've been walking from all the way up on the Broad Branch Road area to the school. So there were two families that were there, and they were suffered the same thing. That area was gotten rid, the homes were gotten rid of. They had to leave that area, and they scattered. They couldn't go back to Broad Branch Road because that was already taken.
So for those of you who haven't been able to see it, at the old Reno School, which still stands behind DL Junior High School, inside there's a spectacular multi-part exhibit explaining the history of Fort Reno, the Fort Reno neighborhood, and the Fort Reno School, which was built for blacks only, but closed shortly after the neighborhood was forced away. And the signage that we've been promoting to exist at the Lafayette Poynter Park Recreation Center will do a similar thing, although on a much less grand scale. I'm alert to the fact that we are right up on the end of our time. And so there were some specific questions that I could run through very quickly. And I think what I would propose to do is that we will email answers to those directly to the people who asked them as soon as we can after the event. Whether the Moten family was related to Lucy Moten, whether Curtis, I can't read my own writing here, the man who worked at the Broad Branch Market was part of the family, et cetera. We'll deal with those questions later. I also have to apologize to, we appreciated the size of our Zoom license, and so we had a large number of people who could not get in this evening, and so we will.
Bradley, you want something?
Please, Bobby, if you could turn off your microphone.
What you want?
Robert Crowley, please turn off your microphone. Thank you. And so, so we will post this entire event plus answers to the rest of the questions on our website, and invite you to discussion of the rest of the story on October 15th, or more of the story. And if there are suggestions or other questions that occur to you, please email them to us, and we can address them in our annex or our appendix chat that we will record and post shortly thereafter. James, any last thoughts before we close?
Yes.
Go ahead, James.
Okay. What your support, each one of you, your support of over the past several years of assisting with having George Poynter and my ancestors acknowledged for their contributions. You know, you're a sterling example of what we need more in this country. White people have a voice. White people can unify within under fairness and know what fair is and what fair is not. In most cases, when blacks achieve something politically or fairness, they have a strong white following. So I thank you for being so supportive and using your intelligence and professionalism to help carry George Poynter and my descendants forward, and receiving a fair shake and fair an acknowledgement. So thank you.
Well, thank you, James, and thank you, Tanya, for helping with us at this event as well. Our objective is to have a serious discussion about these issues and raise the hidden history. But of course, that's just the start of a conversation. It's not the end. Tim Hannapel has been the entrepreneur behind pulling a lot of this together for historic Chevy Chase. So Tim, thank you yourself as well. You've led us all on this path. So with that, I want to thank all of you who've joined us tonight and encourage you to stay with us on this journey and help us as we catch our history up to date. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.